Okay, joining me now is Dr. Rufus Isaacs. Hey, Rufus, thanks so much for taking time to join me today on the Vineyard Underground podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Fritz. Looking forward to the conversation, and let's talk about insects.
Yeah, let's get down and dirty and dig underground here a little bit. Hey, before we get into today's topic about insects in the vineyard, can you share just a little bit about your background story with the listener and how did you get interested in the fields of entomology and viticulture, and what's been the focus of your work?
Yeah, so I started here at Michigan State University 25 years ago, and I had the responsibility of working not only in blueberries like you see behind me, but also in grapes, in the juice and wine grape industries in Michigan. And yeah, I'd always been really interested in entomology and insects, in their management. I've been working with grape growers during this time on their more pressing insect challenges, and also looking at some of the biological controls, which we'll talk about. Yeah, and it's a great college to work in where you really value applied entomology, and I get to work on that every day.
That's awesome. I think, Rufus, the first time I knew of your name was when I was still a graduate student at Penn State, but it wasn't until I started working at Texas A&M, and when I moved to the region, growers didn't realize it so much, but they had quite an infestation problem with great berry moth. And I remember I'd reached out to you several times to look into your management and research practices. And we ended up tackling berry moth and reduced the number of sprays they were doing, and reduced the number of broad spectrum sprays. And so I just want to publicly thank you for the work you've done on great berry moth, because I know it's helped me and a lot of growers along the path. What are some of these spring insects that can be most destructive in the vineyard? And we'll start with that. Let's go through a few of the big ones.
Yeah, so as things warm up in the spring and we start to see those buds pushing out, even before then, I'm trying to get our growers here to think about some of the overwintering pests that they may be able to manage. In particular, we've had some outbreaks of Erinium mite, which is fairly rare, but the timing for control of it is before the buds even emerge. So, there's some benefits from a delayed dormant, early dormant oil application, and that can smother them, or there's even some miticides. So we've been trying to get people to think about the pest management season waking up at the same time as the bugs are, the vines are. And then, yeah, as those buds come out, that's the first food that some of those insects like cutworms and flea beetles have access to, and they love those early buds. And of course, if one insect eats one bud, that's 2 or 3 clusters that would have been there. So the threshold tends to be pretty low for those. We recommend around 2% of buds damaged as a working threshold. And it takes some scouting to see them, because cutworms are active at night, so you might not see them unless you're out with the headlamp on. And then the flea beetles jump around, which is why they're called flea beetles. And their damage is just a tiny little hole that they've bored into a bud. So I think, yeah, early season scouting in those bright, sunny spring days can be really good for seeing if those issues are popping up.
When we get closer to bloom, we already mentioned that berry moth is something that historically in the northeastern United States would come out around bloom time and lay eggs in the blooms. And then when the berries formed, the larvae could infest those early berries. We found in the South here that they came later. They would come after berries were already set. And so we would find a biofix of one of our local varieties and base it on the berry size for that after a while, or a degree day model. So berry moth's one example. What are some other things that start to show up after we get to bloom and fruit set? What should a grower be looking for?
Yeah, so one that we see sporadically, but where it is present, it can be a big problem, is Roshaper beetle. So that's an orangey tan colored beetle with long legs. They come out of grassy areas adjacent to vineyards. So the female beetles are laying their eggs in those grassy areas. And then when they emerge, they're looking for flowering plants. They're called Roshapers because they go to flowers, but they love grape clusters and grape leaves, and those, especially the thinner skinned varieties. The record number I've ever counted of those is about 270 row shapers on one vine.
Really? In
So
Michigan? Is this
Michigan.
Michigan? Okay.
Yes.
And what other states?
Threshold.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, talking of a threshold, that's definitely above the threshold. I mean, the vine was completely covered. Yeah, it's across the eastern U.S. and it's much more in sandy sites where there's that grassy situation that I described. And so where we have that, growers are protecting their vines from row shapers. But often it lines up with that first activity of berry moths. So they might be trying to control leaf hoppers early in the season. So it's often a spray for multiple types of insects. And if you have a beetle and a leafhopper and a moth, you might be using a more broad spectrum product to get all of those. If you only have one or the other, you might be able to use a very selective insecticide instead.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. If it's, for example, if it's just berry moth or Lepidopterus, I feel like that's the low hanging fruit in specific products. There's so many out there. There's BT as an organic product. There's spinosad type products, both organic.
Yeah, Intrepid is extremely effective and super selective on them and allows all the natural enemies to survive on targeting the berry moth. So yeah, I think, like I said earlier, there's a lot of newer options that I think growers are still getting familiar with.
Yeah. And, at the end, I'd like to talk a little bit about the use of spray adjuvants too, because I know you work with adjuvants, helping with the efficacy of things like Intrepid 2F. So let's save that as a chit chat at the end, but I want to hit that. What are some other bloom through fruit set insects out there? You mentioned berry moth, row shafer. I think you said beetles. Now, are we talking about Japanese beetles here?
Yeah, for us, Japanese beetle comes in late June, early July, and it's active through July and August. If you've got it, it's a problem. It's a headache, and it seems like it's devouring your vines. I do like to remind growers they often do like leaf thinning and pulling and are themselves pulling off leaf area. So think about that when you're considering how much damage that's actually doing. Or is it just thinning your canopy up on the top for you? But yeah, if you've got a susceptible variety, especially if it's young vines and you're trying to get those established, you don't want to lose, half your leaf area.
Sure.
I usually use this sort of rule of thumb of about 30% leaf area that vines can handle loss, especially in the middle of the summer once they're already growing. So that's actually a lot. If you see photographs of 30% leaf area loss, it's a significant amount of leaf area loss. If it's less than that, I think, again, like we said earlier, those leaves are going to start pushing. New leaves will replace the ones that have been fed upon, and usually the clusters, unless you've got a super high crop load, the clusters are going to get ripened through the summer still.
How much mealybugs have become an issue? I was just recently at a conference where there's a whole grower panel on mealybug control. And one of the take homes for me there, and this is in regions in California where mealybug is established and is spread leaf roll virus, which is the main concern, in addition to the direct, pest issues that it causes. They're using multiple modes of control, and nothing is really getting rid of it. They're keeping it at a threshold where it's contained, or the spread of virus is reduced but not eliminated. Are mealybugs an issue in Michigan and the northeastern United States where your work is focusing?
So we've been watching the work on mealybugs, and I've done a few studies here that I've actually had trouble getting mealybugs to do the studies. That's how much of an issue they are here.
Okay, not an issue. Okay.
But they're present. They're just not in very abundant levels. And we have seen more and more leaf roll coming into our vineyards. So mealybugs are here. We've got the virus, but it is difficult. It's been difficult to do research on it here just because the levels have not been what other people have seen in other regions. But we definitely have been advising growers if they have, if you have a block that's infested and you're seeing the leaf roll symptoms, then you need to start thinking about how big is that? What's the extent of that in the vineyard? Do you have to do roguing to pull out infected vines to stop further spread? And And then think about how susceptible the adjacent blocks are, because you may then be dealing with, if you have a very susceptible vineyard nearby, then the risk is that that gets spread and the mealybugs get moved by the ants. There's a whole connection there. I've been looking to my colleagues at Cornell who've been doing a lot more of this. They have really good virologists and entomologists working together. And I think some of their recommendations are where I've been guiding our growers to go. And they've done some nice economic work as well to show that